You just heard Speed King from Deep Purple from the 1970 record In Rock. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And today, or tonight, whenever you are listening, we are...
Blackmore's night.
Yeah, Blackmore's night. Yeah. We are going to be exploring and dissecting the dichotomy of these two famous Deep Purple records, which are In Rock and, of course, the classic rock Machine Head.
Yes, Rob Flynn.
Yeah, Rob Flynn and Bush. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So, Gavin Rossdale. So, huge influence on those two, obviously.
Exactly.
I mean, Machine Head is one of these records, too, which we'll be listening to second after we get into In Rock. But I told Mark, I think, it's kind of a task to look at it because it's associated in kind of classic rock, like Hall of Fame type, things. I mean, I'd say, Led Zeppelin 4, Machine Head, and like Black Sabbath Paranoid are like the trinity of like pre-heavy metal, you know, almost in a way,
but almost gets like lumped in with like Golden Earring and Foreigner or something like that kind of weirdness,
but Golden Earring's actually awesome. Yeah, like they're strangely awesome. I know
but they're not as like proto-heavy metal as.
No, I agree with you there. Yeah,
and as much so as
they
like,
become kind of like a classic rock band. I think like when I was young, it was weird for me to hear people have like such affinity for Deep Purple in like heavy metal circles because I just thought of like the trinity of like Space Truckin', Highway Star. Like I thought of like the Dazed and Confused soundtrack, where they're like chasing like 8th graders to paddle them while Highway Star is playing and stuff. And it's like, it's not that it makes those songs like suck or that they're not heavy or that they're not important. It's just almost like there was like there was something like blocking our view to be able to like properly listen to them almost.
And to know what had come before too, because Deep Purple at that point had already had a pretty big
that was like
shift.
Because In Rock is their 4th full-length record, and it's like the beginning of like Mach 2.
Mark 2, yeah.
And then 2 records later, so it's their 6th record. So I mean, they're really well established, and it's only 1972. So for 72, Machine Head was such like Black Sabbath had only put out Masters of Reality by 72. Like you have to kind of put that in perspective that they were really ahead of the curve. They started even before Sabbath, like almost at the same time as Led Zeppelin started, once they kind of emerged as the, new Yardbirds and stuff. So I think, Deep Purple kind of came out of, and you said, you're a little bit more familiar with their Mark 1 sort of stuff, that it's kind of got like a minstrelly vibe, or it's
just not as like the stuff because that was one thing I started a weird way with Deep Purple too, is I started with the Coverdale era because I like all the Whitesnake stuff.
Sure.
And basically early Whitesnake, because when people hear that evil word, dirty word of the Whitesnake,
Still of the Night, man,
they think just of that 80s record, the self-titled. And the stuff they were doing in the 70s was just really great blues rock.
Yep.
And it was a continuation
blues rock
out of not quite as organ-based, but it was just and even John Lord was on the first Whitesnake record.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think I knew that. Yeah.
So it was just that continuation.
It's kind of like the Stormbringer records and stuff like that, with the Coverdale stuff, yeah.
And then, so I kind of went backwards, and then eventually got to my first, I think the first time I ever heard Ian Gillan was on a Sabbath record that my uncle gave me.
Seventh Star, or is he on Born Again? He's on Born Again. Yeah, that's right.
And I got that, and I was like, this is not Ozzy. I don't know if I like this.
Yeah, sure.
As a young kid, and I was like, but I always had that cover in the back of my mind, too. Mm-hmm. So it was only like over the last, 10 years or so that I've really gotten into this era of Deep Purple.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I'm sure everyone out there, whether you're a fan or not of Deep Purple, knows Highway Star and Smoke on the Water and Space Truckin', like Woman from Tokyo, Mm-hmm. I remember Michael from Opeth really kind of starting to talk about like even some of the 80s stuff, like Perfect Strangers and things.
That's the comeback record where the Mark II lineup came back together. And that's a great
it's a fantastic record. Song, fantastic record. Yeah,
I just saw them recently, and they played Perfect Strangers, which I always think of, the Belky Bartakamus, the sitcom,
Larry, cousin Larry.
But yeah, no, that's a great. Probably,
that was probably racially offensive. I have to apologize for my terrible impressions. But no, yeah, I mean, like Deep Purple, I've always thought of as kind of a classic rock band for some reason until really the last like 10 years. you know, I always used to hear about like, oh, in the Guinness Book of World Records, like Deep Purple was like the loudest band in the world and stuff like that. And then I would hear stuff like a song on like where Mark and I grew up, there was a radio station called Z93, which played like, you know, just whatever, you know, classic rock and newer bullshit hits and stuff.
Yeah.
And so you'd hear like your 4 or 5 in rotation, and I never really gained a sense of appreciation until like,
we never heard deep cuts.
No.
Ever.
And like we were talking, you know, going back to Speed King, which we just opened up with, like you listen to the beginning of that song, and I was telling Mark, I don't know if he didn't really know this beforehand, because I think you only had this on vinyl, correct?
Yeah, I've just got the original version.
And so when they finally put out In Rock on CD, the kind of reissue and stuff, the first like minute and like 15 minute and 20 seconds of Speed King was always like cut off, so that like really like just chaotic like
Blackmore guitar noise.
Yeah,
stuff.
like it's I was telling him it reminds me of something like you'd hear like a noise part on like a early MC5 song or something, where it's just like super loud, chaotic and cool, and then it kind of goes in that like organ kind of like bass part before Speed King really sort of kicks in.
But for 69, 70, you know, I think it was recorded in 69.
It was recorded in 69, released in 70, yeah.
That is probably nothing that a record label wants on. That's like, well, you can do that when you play the show, but take that off the record.
Exactly.
That's stupid.
And especially to open the whole record up. Like
people are going to think the record's
put that
like
on,
broken.
like, oh my God, what happened?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's almost as radical as some of the stuff that you hear on like Kick Out the Jams, you know, for a debut album to be live, and, you know, it just, you know, nothing was ordinary about that. And I'm sure there's aspects I can appreciate now when I listen to In Rock. I'm like, damn, that's such a weird choice for like that era, you know, because it has elements that like, especially when we get into like Child in Time, which is, you know, 10 minutes long, you know, super epic, very progressive. There are a lot of like prog rock kind of things happening on this record that you could see rooted in King Crimson.
Yeah.
You could see rooted in like early Genesis. There's a band that we're fans of called Steamhammer. They're a little bit more obscure, but it's a band Mike, who we used to work with, introduced us to. You know, I hear a lot of those kind of things, you know, in terms of the compositional style and some of the weird choices that they're making. I don't think they get enough credit necessarily for doing, I don't know, I guess the strange choices that they sort of make, you know?
They're really progressive. I mean, just like how I think they're almost the penultimate precursor to the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah. I
Stuff
can see
like
that.
there's so much Priest and Maiden that you can pull out of this. Like Ian Gillan's voice, Bruce Dickinson has already said, Arthur Brown and Ian Gillan is where I stole all my shtick from.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can hear so much of that, but even just in Maiden's songwriting, especially on the later on stuff, but just all the just time changes, riff changes. There's tons of that happening in here, and it does, and a lot of it's
and the back and forth soloing that sort of goes on and stuff like that. Yeah, I think what makes them different than your King Crimson and your bands that are decidedly in the progressive like metal camp or progressive rock camp is that they are very rooted more, I think, in the sort of like British hard rock, hard blues kind of style, like the organ playing like really kind of like grounds them to some of that. Not to say that prog bands didn't have organs and stuff, because you did hear some of that, but
Crimson was always like, they had one song that kind of sounded like it might be on a Deep Purple record, and everything else was
pretty
weird.
out there.
Yeah, like you could, as a kid, like I'd hear Court of the Crimson King or Sorry I'd Buy That, and I was like, I can listen to like 2 songs in here, everything else is like makes no sense to me. So
sure. You know, and I mean, I think the Deep Purple, probably some of their influences that they would probably draw upon would be, you know, some of the stuff that the organ playing you hear on like Animals records, you know, whereas like Sabbath was probably drawing more out of like the Yardbirds and Rolling Stones kind of style of like harder edge blues. I think Deep Purple was drawing on that, but they were also kind of like taking from some of the quirkier things that like the later Kinks records were doing, or the Animals records were doing, or even some of the like stuff you hear on Beatles records. I mean, Benefit for Mr. Kite from Sgt. Pepper had some really kooky like organ stuff going on. I mean, the Doors, there's more like almost like a psychedelic element to some of the type of things, you know, when you hear Highway Star, Space Truck, and there is like a psychedelic yet progressive yet blues rock, you know, whereas like Sabbath was like heavy blues, you know. Zeppelin did like some experimentation, but they were never as heavy as Sabbath or Purple, you know.
Yeah.
But you definitely hear some of like, you know, the things that Jimmy Page was doing, which he learned obviously in the Yardbirds, you can hear some of that with Richie Blackmore because he's very much virtuoso, say compared to like Tony Iommi, you know. But like, there's also these strange, weird choices that Blackmore makes that like Jimmy Page was a little bit more straight ahead with some of the things he was doing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's weird for me, like when you're trying to like figure out like, well, where did they come from? I know like their early stuff was compared to Vanilla Fudge, which is a band I'm kind of aware of as a British band, but I don't know a ton about them. But like Mark 1 was always compared apparently to Vanilla Fudge, and they had
nothing like
too,
I can't even really think of too much of how it sounds. I mean, just like nothing really remarkable that grabbed me.
Yeah, I mean, I always think like MC5 meets Sabbath meets Led Zeppelin. Like they're sort of like drawing from like weird little camps of each, you know, because they're not as like bottom heavy as Sabbath. It was as doomy, you know.
Yeah,
they're a little bit more drive like Led Zeppelin because of the virtuoso guitar and stuff like that, and the more.
They're kind of pushing all their instruments too. Everything's like turned all the way up and blown out, and
especially on In Rock, you know. And I mean, when we originally sort of talked about kind of doing a show like this, Mark was kind of like, "Well, I'll take In Rock and you take Machine Head." And like in the back of my mind, I was thinking, "Well, I kind of like In Rock more than Machine Head too." But at the same time, I was like, "Well, okay, I'll take this as a challenge. I'll go and I'll find some stuff to kind of validate and look into what Machine Head's all about." But I think as a metalhead, like a true like more. Maybe an extreme metalhead, I think In Rock is the more metallic record in a way. I think
it's abrasive. It's like Child in Time is. It's like a Rime of the Ancient Mariner-ish weird. And it's the whole almost all the lyrics are him screaming.
Yeah, yeah. There is a lot of like precursor to King Diamond and Priest, vocals and stuff that are kind of going on here. So. I think Speed King, what's cool about that tune, I was telling Mark, is I love that, like, to me it's ode to like old rock and roll with the Little Richard sort of things happening. And
everybody's seen that old promo video of them like against the white background, everybody playing like on this cramped little stage and stuff.
Yeah, there's almost like a Rocket 88 quality to it, which if you don't know Rocket 88, that was kind of considered the first like rock and roll song before, and it had Ike Turner on piano, and it was like, out of Sun Studios, and kind of this cacophonous song about race car driving, and stuff. And you got Speed King, and then when we get to Highway Star, which is kind of another like kind of there is this like, even though they're kind of doing some weird things musically, they're kind of rooted in what rock and roll was sort of supposed to be about, this kind of fun, like youthful sort of
fast
element, cars and women and stuff like that. And I mean, we're gonna play a song called Hard Lovin' Man. I mean, that's like a straight out of rhythm and blues kind of like kind of thing there too. So and Crimson never did that. Crimson or any of the other so-called British prog bands were not singing about those things at all. They were very much like sci-fi, fantasy, like kind of off doing like different types of things.
Yeah, but this still had, it was so like kind of close still in like thematically to I guess to a little bit, not as much to Sabbath, but more heavy metal than a lot of the like Zeppelin or say like themes.
Sure.
And a lot of this stuff, because you look at how like varied a lot of this stuff is. Look at like Maiden. How they wear all their influences on their sleeve for like, okay, I just watched Out of the Silent Planet. We're gonna write a song about that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So, but I think when you listen to a song like or an album like In Rock, we were reading some stuff about the production, and they make all these comments about how everything was like the VU meter was like in the red like the whole time.
Yeah, and
you can hear that with Speed King and some of that different stuff. And like Black Knight, the song we're gonna kind of listen to first, which is the official first appearance. They did like a Philharmonic thing before they recorded In Rock. That was like the first actual appearance of like Mark II. But then
they put the double LP out.
Yeah, but then the very first actual like single that they recorded was Black Knight, which they put out prior to this record.
Okay.
And I dig Black Knight a lot. It's got kind of like it kind of drives like early like Rat, Motley Crue. It's just got like this just like just kind of like simple 3-minute like very like but then when you get to the solo kind of like crackles. It's really like wild and kind of reckless abandon, like you said. There's like a MC5 quality and stuff like that. Same with Bloodsucker. You get a lot of really cool kind of vocal blendings. I think Bloodsucker, which is the song we're gonna hear next after Black Knight, that's where you really start to see Gilliam like screams and stuff like that. Like his kind of melodic screams, but like his Halford kind of like range that's starting to kind of get out there.
He's got a weird, for that era, I don't even know how you'd even, he's just like a lot of screaming, which I don't, it doesn't fit in necessarily with everything of that era. Mm-hmm. Like Robert Plant would scream, but it wasn't like he had a pretty, varied voice.
Same with Tyner. Tyner could scream,
but he could also have like an R&B voice that sounded smooth. But Gillan at first is kind of really abrasive, and I think they almost have to like rein him in a little bit.
And I think like, after like really digging into both these records, the secret component of Deep Purple, they're sort of like asterisks that like kind of gave them, was John Lord. I mean, just Richie Blackmore is amazing, and when you get to like some of the choices that he makes, like he does some weird like diminished riffs that like no one had really heard. When we get to Smoke on the Water, I'll talk a little bit more about that, like why people like freaked out about that riff, because I've learned about it in all the rock documentaries I have to show in my class and stuff. So, but like Blackmore makes some really unique choices. But there were other guitar players that were pretty like virtuoso too. I mean, he's not the only one. Whereas like I can't really think of anyone else that was doing with the organ kind of what John Lord was doing in the early 70s. I mean, you had Rick Wakeman and Yes that was doing some pretty kooky stuff, but Yes was never as straightforward, like in your face, as anything that Purple was doing. So,
sure, yeah.
I don't know, just your food for thought. If you know of someone, I mean, obviously Mark and I are not organ experts, but you had Arthur Brown and Spencer Davis group. Steppenwolf, Magic Carpet Ride has some cool organ stuff going. Obviously the Doors, and I mentioned the Animals. I mean, House of the Rising Sun, like their version of that is pretty like organ heavy, which is pretty unique at the time in '64 when that single came out.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I mean, like. I guess, when did you first get a hold of these kind of records for the first time? Because I know I kind of avoided Purple just because I was like, oh, okay, like whatever, they're Deep Purple, like it's going to be like any other classic rock record.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where I was starting to go to record stores and picking up all the non-Ozzy record. Like I got all the Dio Ozzy, or all the Dio Ozzy, all the Dio Black Sabbath stuff. And like kind of digesting that. It was just in like an era when everything, I wasn't really interested in.
So you're just buying old stuff,
new music. I wanted to go in and like fill in like holes and stuff I've never. Plus, it's got In Rock's got one of the best covers ever of them on Mount Rushmore. It's kind of presumptuous, but also it's just a super iconic cover that's been lampooned tons of times. But yeah, it was just kind of a time when I was going back and stuff that I was really getting. I was getting into a lot of Uriah Heep at the time, so that was like an obvious thing to go back and check out Purple. I think
I saw it a lot on like people's like best ofs lists and stuff, like older musicians like Slayer and Metallica, when they were talking about like what were records that influenced them, And
nothing was probably as Metallica and loud as that at the time.
No, I mean, because Paranoid comes out I think in 70 or 71, and I mean even then like that's bottom heavy, but like not as like instantly metallic, as some of the stuff that you're going to hear, coming up. So, all right, so we got. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in comparison, Ozzy's voice is kind of tame compared to Gillian's in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Gillian was like, like I said, reckless abandon. That's kind of like the approach that they're taking, and you'll hear that. Black Knight's a little like contained vocally, but you'll hear it a little bit more, like I said, in Bloodsucker. And then for my money, Child in Time is the centerpiece of this whole record, and maybe one of the centerpieces of Deep Purple's career. I mean, it's just like an absolute masterpiece of a song. And we can probably break that and Hard Lovin' Man down a little bit when we come back. So we've got Black Knight, their original first single as a new group, and as, well, I guess we should say, as a new group, that's when Ian Gilliam, I almost said Terry Gilliam, Roger Glover and Ian Gilliam had come from a band called Episode 6 that apparently I think Blackmore and John Lord were kind of aware of, and they got them to join the band when the original vocalist and bass player were, I guess, kicked out or quit after.
Yeah.
So
I think they were asked to leave.
And then you got Ian Pace on drums, Richie Blackmore on guitar, and then John Lord, and that's the group. When we're talking about Mark II, that's who we're talking about. So enjoy Black Knight, Bloodsucker, Child in Time, and Hard Lovin' Man.
Baby, I'm on the way down the line that I'm going. a sip of all the wine you got. Take a tip from me and give it here a big delight. I'm not a whining, I'm a putting on a show. But you know I got it deal. Tried another, but you didn't wanna know.
You'll see the line that's drawn between good and bad. See the blind man shooting at the world, bullets flying, taking toll. If you've been bad, oh Lord, I bet you have, and you've not been hit by a flying lead. You better close your eyes, oh, bow your head, wait for the ricochet.
Hard Loving Man, Child in Time, Bloodsucker, and then we open up with Black Knight. Child in Time, like I kind of mentioned to you, like off mic, that it had qualities of it, and Hard Loving Man to some extent too, that reminded me of some of like the early Priest stuff, like Victim of Changes, Dreamer Deceiver, some of the stuff on like Sad Wings. You know, it had that kind of
before they really got their, you know, before British Steel kind of cemented what they were.
Yep, or even like the Leather era kind of kicked in with Unleashed in the East and some of that stuff.
Yeah,
you know, but there's something about like the way in which he's using his voice, the sort of back and forth, kind of the textured solos that Blackmore's doing. No one was like kind of playing metal hard rock solos like that at that point. You know, I mean,
he could use just a couple. Like, I mean, look at how simple some of the songs are when you break down what it actually, you know, what the notes are. Like Smoke on the Water, anybody can play it.
Sure,
but only he can play it the right way. You know, way. Yeah.
And even like in Hard Loving Man, I'd say like, you know, that's a song like where, you know, instrumentally, especially that middle sequence in that song, it's more innovative and progressive than I think a lot of people give Deep Purple credit for. I think they get pigeonholed so often as this sort of hard rock band that no one really appreciates or is even aware of the fact that like the things he's doing in that guitar solo there I mentioned is almost like a precursor to like the stuff he does on like Rainbow with Stargazer, where he's doing almost these like slowed down like Middle Eastern kind of riffs that almost sound like Egyptian kind of thing, and that was what made like Stargazer so cool in the middle of that and Dio's awesome, you know, vocals to it. But you know, I guess if you're a naysayer to Deep Purple because you've only really ever heard what songs that we're going to hear kind of in the next set here, you know, hopefully like when you hear a record like In Rock or some of those songs that we just played, like it gives you an awareness like, hey, it's worth maybe taking a chance and going and checking out some of these other records, you know?
Yeah, and really those two, because the ones kind of surrounding it, like
I like Fireball too.
Fireball's pretty good.
It's not great, but it's not a masterpiece.
The production's not as like explosive.
It's not as fierce. Yeah, you're right.
In Rock, and it's not as polished as, you know,
Machine Head.
Yeah, but
right.
Those are kind of just like weird bastard shoulder. And then that, what the hell is the other one?
It's the one that has Women in Tokyo.
That's the only hit.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that record.
It's like a bunch of bubbles on the front of it. So I forget what it's called, but.
Well, so, you know, Fireball comes out, and that's where you kind of start to hear, in my opinion, when you hear Fireball, as we kind of move towards Machine Head, they really start to embrace, like you said, a more polished, I guess you could say, quote unquote, like stadium rock type sound.
It's refined, yeah.
You know, it's a little bit more refined. I hear it's like, it's monolithic, but yet it's less aggressive in a way. If that makes sense. I mean, In Rock has some aggressive elements to it at times, you know.
Well, like hearing some of John Lord's, like, organ passages, it's like, you know,
it's like piercing.
Yeah, you want to like, you know, bury your head under a blanket or something,
which is kind of awesome. You know, I like it. You know, but for sure, you know.
But it's like physically hard to listen to sometimes.
Yeah, he did that in the 2-minute mark of Hard Lovin' Man. And I think you looked up what the hell he was doing. He was like plugging it through like a Marshall and a Leslie at the same time.
He used those for two different different songs, but he went back and forth between those two amps.
Gotcha. That's cool though. So, but yeah, so you start to hear that with Fireball, which was recorded in 1971, and then you arrive, of course, at Machine Head, and they record Machine Head famously in Lake Geneva in Switzerland. If you want to know all about the recording, you just have to pay attention to the lyrics on Smoke on the Water, because that's basically autobiographical of the shenanigans that went down.
Well, also Netflix, there's the making of the record or whatever.
Oh, really?
That older, it used to be a video series that you could rent.
Gotcha.
It's like a 45-minute making of, where they go into the studio of the original tapes and play back different, like, oh, here's just the guitar line or just the keyboard line or whatever.
Well, I know they have like some footage of the actual casino and stuff burning down.
Yeah, like it's like Super 8 movies or something.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm sure most of you know the story of what happens on Smoke in the Water, but they're at a Frank Zappa show and somebody fired a flare in the middle of the show and burnt like the casino down. And so they basically had written 6 songs for Machine Head, and they knew they were short a song, and that's when Ritchie Blackmore just started messing around on the guitar. Played the most famous riff, arguably alongside probably like Iron Man from Black Sabbath in heavy metal history. And and then they just wrote lyrics about what they had just seen, and you get this masterpiece that sort of comes out of it. And I think, one of the things that happens is, you hear a lot of the stuff on Machine Head, and I said this is an album that suffers due to classic rock syndrome, where we've heard the trio of kind of classic songs, but rarely have we really listened to them, and so like one of the things I would argue is sit down and actually listen to Highway Star, which we're going to open up the next set with, and sit down and actually like kind of listen to Smoke on the Water. Don't just hear it, because for years all I did was hear these songs. I didn't really listen to them.
Well, it's the same way like Stairway to Heaven and
I wrote Stairway to Heaven, Water. Whole Lot of Love, and Stranglehold from Ted Nugent.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Those are songs.
All those songs,
don't
like
appreciate.
You hear the first couple notes, and you're just like, "Oh, this song again."
Yeah.
But listen to what is actually happening, how they build, and all that stuff. I think are.
Yeah. So I mean, I think.
And the older I get, the more I think I appreciate some of the like simplicity of songwriting. But like it's so simple yet so memorable. Like how did that riff? How was that not written before?
And yet then when you get into the midsection solos of like Smoke on the Water and stuff like that, there's some not simple stuff going on.
Oh yeah,
they're still doing some of the complex kind of things, and and
it all slowly builds with each Ian Pace starting
the layers of
hi-hats and
the thing that Pace and Glover and Lord are doing underneath everything. You're so drawn to the guitar and to Ian Gillan kind of smoke on doing the famous vocal line that you kind of ignore the best parts, which is all that stuff happening underneath.
Yeah, when they lock in.
Yep, it's pretty awesome stuff. And so we're going to open with Highway Star, and I would say this kind of rivals Speed King in terms of like kind of its explosive, great album kicker off type thing. Again, it has sort of themes of the kind of hot rod and driving and stuff like that. And then the stuff that's going on between the solo in this song between Lord and Blackmore is really the birth of like Children of Bodom. I mean, in a way, like the idea of having these like solos.
Between that, well, you've heard Rising Force,
Yngwie, yeah,
that was Mark II, and then Children of Bodom is the third. Yeah.
Sometimes I look past Yngwie Malmsteen, even though
more is more. You can't look past them.
Yeah, that's true. More is more. That's such a great quote. As he's pulling away in like 4 Lamborghinis or whatever. So, but I mean, Highway Star, again, this is an album or a song I always associate with like chase scenes and Days of Confused and stuff, but it's funky. There's something sometimes about this era and especially the next era that like reminds me of like the Allman Brothers. Like they're like, or something kind of southern rock. And I think it's because no matter what Deep Purple's doing, they're still very much rooted, like we were talking about before, in kind of like the original like feeling of rock and roll. You know? And so that's what I kind of appreciate.
Well, I think Judas Priest carries that on, which I don't know if we mentioned that or not before, but how Highway Star seems like the first Judas Priest song to me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things too, like lyrically, Smoke on the Water is pretty simplistic. Space Truckin', I'm not really sure what Space Truckin's kind of singing about. Pictures of Home is a little bit more on the serious side, but a lot of the stuff that Deep Purple's singing about is not, Sabbath was doing kind of social commentary. They were singing anti-war songs about drugs and doom and gloom, and Led Zeppelin was doing some of that and also singing about some pretty like poetic kind of like things, and Deep Purple was kind of more of fun. They were more of like a working class kind of like approach to lyrical writing. You know what I mean? I think you just, they weren't trying to do anything like haughty toddy or too fancy, and maybe some rock critics probably look down on them because of that. I have a feeling. I mean, I always hear like Deep Purple kind of thrown under the bus sometimes for like, oh, their long solos and this and that and different kind of things sort of going on there, and the dinosaur rock that punk rock in the late 70s was sort of rebelling against, which I get. But in a way, I don't think it's Deep Purple. I think you're thinking more of like your Emerson, Lake and Palmers and some of your Boston, really like just sort of like empty, soulless kind of bands. And I think if anything, there's a lot of soulfulness in what Deep Purple's trying to do,
Sure.
And they might go on some like kind of long solos here and there, but at the same time, like it's what they're. But
they don't even seem that long in comparison to a lot of things.
When you hear like their live records and stuff, they do kind of do some improvisation. But the Who did that. Like a lot of bands like played off of that. You know?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's kind of what rock and roll is supposed to be.
And if you see them live, everybody's got their fucking solo.
Do they?
God. Yeah, which I don't need to hear
No.
a solo by anybody.
No. I mean, it's rare that I want to hear anything that's in the realm of kind of a solo. But I think that speaks to their openness of their music. You know,
Sure.
When we get into like Space Truck, and I think there's these things where like there's like kind of these funky little bits where there's an openness where you could see where the organ could go off for 4 minutes there if it needed to in a live setting. The guitar could go off in like a weird kind of thing going on there.
Well, a lot of those riffs are so simple you can just kind of jam on them and then people come in. It's almost like playing jazz or something.
Yeah, and there's like, especially in rock, they talked about how jazz was like a big influence on them, and I know Sabbath especially had kind of.
I mean, those songs really seem more. Everything on In Rock seems more jammy than this. Than when you go into Machine Head, it seems like it was much more planned out, refined.
Sure, they had some guidance.
Maybe the guidance of a producer that wasn't just like, this is too loud.
Like, hey, let's make some money. Let's write some hit songs here. You know, kind of thing. So we're gonna get into Highway Star, and then we got a pair of, I guess I call them kind of the melodic twins of the record, which is Pictures of Home and Never Before. Pictures of Home kind of opens with, I joked to Mark, the Over the Mountain Ozzy Osbourne kind of drum intro. But it's got really nice melodic solos kind of going on there. And then Never Before kind of has more of an R&B kind of funky vibe to it, which is cool. Kind of like a preview of like the Glenn Hughes, Coverdale era that's on the way. And kind of an Alice Cooper sort of vibe, David Bowie sort of vibe during the chorus. And one other thing, because he never gets enough love, is in Pictures of Home, Roger Glover gets to kind of kill it on the bass for a little while. There's like kind of a little cool bass breakdown, little solo part in that.
He's pretty
song.
Understated a lot of the time. He just kind of stands back. He didn't do a solo at the show.
I mean, it's hard too when you got John Lord and Richie Blackmore, like these two like kind of forces of nature.
Well, even now,
forefront,
neither one of those guys are there. But
even then, the songs weren't really built and designed for that.
Yeah.
So. All right, so enjoy Highway Star, Pictures of Home, Never Before, and then a little new ditty called Smoke on the Water.
Nobody gonna take my car. I'm gonna race into the Nobody gonna beat my car. It's gonna bring the speed of the sound. Oh, it's a killing machine. It's got everything. Like a driving power, big fat tires and everything. I love it, and I need it. I believe it. Yeah, it's a man hurricane. All right, hold tight. I'm a highway star. I'm a highway star. I'm a highway Somebody shouting on Pleasant Mountain. Only my own words return. Nobody's up there. It's a deception. When will I ever learn? I'm alone here with emptiness, egos, and snow. Unfriendliness chilling my body. And whispering pictures of home. Wondering blindly, how can they find me? Maybe they don't even know. My body is shaking, anticipating the call of the black hooded crow. I'm alone here with emptiness, egos, and snow. Unfriendliness chilling my body and taunting with pictures of home. Here in this prison of my own making, year after day I have grown into a hero, but there's no worship. Where have they hidden my throne? I'm alone here with emptiness, egos, and snow. Unfriendliness chilling my body and screaming out pictures of home. flare gun, burn the place to the ground. Smoke on the water, fire in the sky. Smoke on the water. They burned down the gambling house. It died with an awful sound. A funky crowd was running in and out, pulling kids out the ground. When it all was over, we had to find another place. The Swiss time was running out. It seemed that we would lose the race. Smoke on the water, a fire in the sky. Smoke on the water. We ended up at the Grand Hotel. It was empty, cold and bare, but with the rolling truck stones thing just outside, making our music there. With a few red lights, a few old beds, we made a place to sweat. No matter what, we get out of this. I know we'll never forget. Smoke on the water, a fire in the sky. Smoke on the water.
We all came out to Montrose.
We all came out to Montrose. Yeah, the Smoke in the Water, Never Before, Pictures of Home, and Highway Star, all four of which you can find on Deep Purple's Machine Head. And one of the cool things about the little drum outro I wrote at the end of Smoke on the Water is it's very much a cliche of like 80s hair metal. We'll use like some of like the weird like like I can remember Dokken doing it and like
Playing
Poison
stuff
doing
backwards,
it. Yeah, it's like a weird it's very much. But I'm sure at the time people were like, yeah, I've never heard anything like that, you know. So again, appreciate the historicalness of a song like that to know what it meant at the time, not what it means in 2015 when you've heard it 5,000 times.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we got one more that we're gonna close things out in Machine Head, and it's a cool. This is such a, I don't know if psychedelic's the right word. I mean, I think because it's called Space Truckin', it makes me think it should be psychedelic and stuff. But there's definitely, John Lord's getting very like blues funky with the organ at times, and there's some really cool like key changes and choices that he makes on Space Truckin' with the guitar, Richie Blackmore.
Yeah.
Just like he did on Smoke on the Water. And I mentioned before in one of the documentaries that we show in my rock and roll history class, people talk about how what was so weird about it is everyone had heard like a riff like that before, but what freaked them out that no one had really heard before is when it goes dun 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 dun. It's that last dun, that like backwards like slide or whatever that they do, that no one had really even heard like Hendrix or like Peter Green like do stuff like that, and they were like, oh, that's weird. Like it's
and Sabbath have gone to make a career on
yeah,
it.
exactly. So but I mean, again, that's something in hindsight you probably don't appreciate because you've heard it a million times. But again, Blackmore, he's a unique guy. I mean, he's disassociated himself with metal. He's doing like classical, like truly classical music and minstrel music and all acoustic stuff.
Right when John Lord was diagnosed with cancer, they were talking about doing a Deep Purple reunion. And the only reason Blackmore thought about coming back was to play with John Lord one more time. But things came up and didn't work out.
That's really too bad, that those,
because that would have been a hell of a thing to come. People would come out of the woodwork to see him play.
Oh yeah,
with Rainbow or Deep Purple or.
But
I don't know, maybe even Blackmore's Night. Who knows?
maybe. But so let us know, kind of where you're at on that when we kind of versus each other, the Machine Head record or the In Rock record. They are two different beasts. I mean, one, like we said, is very refined. It's very well produced, good songwriting. They kind of had a vision. Whereas In Rock seems a lot more like a band, just a new band really kind of trying to find its way and experimenting with different sounds and different types of like songs,
like
length and
trying to
like
hold
that.
The energy together into some kind of cohesive sound. Yeah.
And Mark and I are ones we're a little rough on the edges sometimes. We like albums that have some of that like rough personality, and In Rock kind of has it in spades. And whereas Machine Head is like just, I mean, it is a machine. It's a well-oiled. These guys are at the peak of their game at this point, and it probably for Deep Purple is really the peak of them in a career sense.
I think it's their best-selling record by
without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's produced not just one but three like standards on rock radio today, which is pretty amazing, including the one that we're going to sort of end with, which is Space Truckin'. So let us know. We got Facebook, Mark and Jason on Facebook. You can find us. Requiem Podcast on Twitter. You can send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what your thoughts about the resurrection, Mark II of Requiem Metal Podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
But with all the same members.
Yeah, with all the same members. We did add like a new cat though. So
yes.
There's a new cat in the house now. So that's something, because Phoenix was kind of like the third member at times. People could hear her in the background and stuff.
About her before.
Like that. So, but let us know which Purple album you like. If there's if you're like Mark, you're a Coverdale era fan. I mean, I like that era as well. I'm probably more of an Ian Gilliam guy than Mark is probably when it comes down to those two guys. But yeah, just give us some feedback. Let us know what shows you want to hear, and then pretty soon, probably by the time maybe you hear this, one of the websites that will be hosting, you can do some donations. And which one is that called again?
Well, we're going to put it up on Bandcamp. So we're going to try to port everything over, because right now we'll never get away or get rid of any of those iTunes things. Yeah. So you can always get it from iTunes, which is hooked to Stitcher and a lot of these other sites that people, or I guess apps that people like to listen to podcasts with. But I'm going to try to port those over to different things like Bandcamp and SoundCloud. So people can stumble upon
our
them.
site basically got kind of destroyed.
It got hacked, and then
stuff,
it's not worth fixing.
Long story short, we kind of have to resurrect some things with that, which is great because it's kind of all part of the theme of what we're trying to do. But tried something different, and and hopefully you dug some Deep Purple. I know this is a band I didn't come to appreciate until a lot later in my life, so maybe there's some younger listeners out there who've kind of avoided them, thinking that they're kind of more of just a classic rock dinosaur or whatever the cliches are about them. There's definitely a little bit more energy and virtuoso to some of the stuff that they're doing than maybe just like the one or two hit songs you probably heard.
So. Oh, sure.
So enjoy some space trucking. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.